So I'll just say briefly a bit about business in the community and who we are and what we do, and then something about a piece of research that we did last year, actually. So we've moved forward since then, but I think it's still interesting in terms of thinking about some of the reasons why talking about these issues is so important. And then I'll say something about what we're now doing, so what next in terms of business in the community. So we're a corporate social responsibility organisation, fundamentally. So there's a whole amount of work that business and community does, which is about relationships between businesses and communities. So Business Class is a programme where businesses and clusters of schools come together, and there's a whole amount of work which is about getting people who are long-term unemployed into jobs. So kind of the role of businesses within local communities is core to what we do. There's a whole area of work around environment and marketplace and sustainability. And then there's the part of the organisation that I'm a part of, which is workplace. So we work on race, gender, well-being and age. And I run our age campaign, and we were kind of thinking about it and incubating it and working it out for a year, and I've been doing it full-time for just over a year now. So again, early days. I think there's a number of us who were kind of catalysed around a whole number of things that happened over the last few years to really be working on this agenda more and more, and to prioritise it and to try to drive change. So I'll start off by talking about our report, which is the Missing Million Recommendations for Action. So it's a report that we did in partnership with an organisation called the IRC, the International Longevity Centre. And what we found is that the first report basically set out this missing million. So there are around 1 million people between 50 and 65 who would like to work but don't have a job. So whilst I think, John, I totally sign up to the narrative of the age of no retirement in the sense of hope and optimism and future, and the world can be different. We're in a stage of transition now. We're somewhere halfway in between. So it was about 100 years ago that old age pensions were created, as a state benefit. So there was maybe one generational cohort for whom there's a real expectation of, you're educated, you go to school, university, whatever you do, you work and you retire, and you've probably saved for your retirement, but there's a state benefit that's there as well. That's actually existed for, in terms of, the great scan of human history. 100 years isn't very long for a particular concept and way of working to have existed. I think it's clear that we're moving to something different now. I don't think any of us quite knows what the future looks like, but it's not going to just be possible to just finish working at 60, 65 and, it's not going to happen because we're living longer, and that's a really positive and exciting thing, but also because the nature of work is changing, and we can work for longer because we're working maybe more with our brains than our hands sometimes, and that means that the way in which we can work is changing as well, and the contribution we can make is changing. So this missing million of people between the age of 50 and 65, people who are kind of caught in the transition. So there is discrimination, there are issues with access to work, there's issues with reconciling work with care and home and life and all the other responsibilities that you have. So there's 1 million people who would like to work but aren't, and it's harder to get a job over 50. If you lose your job, if you become unemployed and you're over 50, it is just tougher to get back into work. Our population is ageing, and it matters to business because of the skills gap that's opening up. So if you believe that there'll be roughly 2 million jobs created in the economy up to 2020, which is a reasonable assumption, if you assume some economic growth, we're going to have a gap of about 7 million jobs. There aren't going to be enough young people coming through school and university and education to fill those gaps. So either we'll grow the economy but in a way which means less jobs, which is totally possible in terms of kind of technology and innovation, or the economy shrinks because we won't have enough people to fill those roles and to generate the wealth that that we all need and that we all want to see. So there are some very specific industries where there are real tangible skills gaps that we can already opening up, and challenges that people are facing. It's going to happen more and more. So if your business is going to grow, you are going to need to keep your best people working longer. It's something that's going to increasingly become a reality. There are some particular groups who are at particular risk as in any kind of change process, any time transition and change. So people who are low paid, people in manual work, people where work takes a real toll on your body, it becomes more difficult to work longer. And whilst we have a missing million between 50 and 65 who want to work but can't get a job, there's also over 1 million people who are currently working beyond 65. So in a sense, there's a mismatch. So we have 1 million pioneers, and those people working beyond 65 tend to be one of two groups. A cohort of them are people who love what they do, highly skilled, probably quite well paid, the kind of portfolio career consultant, that kind of, choosing to work long because they enjoy it and they can, and it's to some extent optional. The other bigger cohort of people currently working beyond 65 are people who are working long because they have no choice. They maybe don't have many pension savings. They probably work in an industry which has a high churn. They, as individuals, may have a kind of tenuous relationship with the workforce. So they might be cooks, cleaners, caterers, those kinds of, maybe retail, those sorts of roles where people may have their own health issues or their own family responsibilities, which mean that they've found it difficult to sustain a really strong relationship with the workforce, and they need to keep working because that's their income. They don't have significant pension savings. So a part of all of our responsibility, I think, is to think about that second cohort of people and to widen that access, either to skill people up, and the Barclays example of older age apprenticeships, which National Express are also doing, others looking at doing as well, is a really great example of being able to enter a skilled industry at a later stage in life. I think that's really powerful and needs to be expanded. One of the industries that's clearly going to grow as our population ages is care. It's not difficult, but it is challenging to make the investment to get to the point where you can be a care worker for a long time because of the physical toll it takes on your body. So we're going to need more care workers because we have an ageing population. Some of those care workers could be themselves older workers, but we need to think about the physicality of that. So there are some areas where it's very clear that changing how we do business will, help the people who really need support in terms of their need to work longer. But the middle is going to fill in. We're all going to be working longer. So at the moment, it's almost like there's two extremes of the workforce who are currently working beyond 65. The middle is going to fill up as well. We're all going to be there. It's going to happen to all of us, but for great reasons, because we're living longer. So work will become a bigger part of our lives. Recommendations for government. So our recommendations for government, the first one sounds too general, but we're essentially in a situation where health and social care is in crisis in terms of funding. So the NHS has had more and more money spent on it year on year, forever and ever, and is now being capped and is struggling. Social care is being sliced into tiny pieces because it's the majority of local government spending, which is taking the brunt of government spending cuts. So in that situation, what do we do to try and make the services sustainable? And it happens that the answer to that question is also the answer to the question of how you deliver better services to support people more effectively. So saving money and doing what's best for people is the same thing, which is great. So there's something about health and social care working better together more efficiently to support individuals better. At the moment, there's a formal right to request flexible working, which you can only exercise if you've been in work for 26 weeks. So it makes sense to us to say that you should be able to ask that question, make that request, either as a part of a recruitment process or on day one. Because if you are, for example, somebody with a caring responsibility or somebody with a child who needs your time, or that classic sandwich generation of older parents and teenage children, you're going to have that challenge on day one as much as you will when you've been there for 26 weeks. So we're asking for government to look at that. There's something about a skill strategy. So if we're all going to work for 10 years longer, we're all going to need to have the skills and knowledge that are going to have to evolve over time. They're kind of the model of an intense kind of dollop of education up to 18 and then not much at all for forever after isn't sustainable. And there's something there about how we support carers and carers leave and tax breaks. So those are the things that we think government could consider in order to enable employers to do the best possible job for making change on these issues. These are our recommendations for business. So they're concrete, and if you want to look at the report online, there's quite a lot under each one in terms of recommendations to drive change. So these were substantially generated by businesses and the members that we work with. So there are issues with recruitment. There is something going wrong where you apply for a job, and if you're over 50, you're less likely to get the job. That just has to change and has to be resolved. Agile work and job design. So some of it is about flexible working in the conventional sense of being able to work from home or work different hours in order to balance out your different responsibilities. But I also think there's something about how we design jobs themselves and how we allocate different types of responsibilities and roles, where there are a whole number of people who are thinking about that in really interesting ways. And if you're having a longer career or a career that spans a bigger portion of your life, we're not all going to have a career trajectory that looks like that. Very few of us will, actually. So to work with organisations to think about different ways of valuing people, and if somebody plateaus for a while because they're writing their first great novel, for example, that's fine, and that's a way in which we will need to understand success differently and be able to have more open conversations about what different kinds of success might look like. Training and development, which mirrors the recommendation for government. Training for line managers, because quite often the way we work is we tend to find a senior leader in an organisation who gets it and supports it, and that's our starting point. And then you'll work with maybe diversity, HR, maybe CSR, some kind of internal service within the organisation that helps the organisation drive change. So you've got that kind of buy-in and that support mechanism. But then you've got everybody else who works there, and every single line manager is hugely important and influential in driving real change within organisations. So specifically how to engage and make line managers' jobs easier, not just make this another task for them, is another area of work. Midlife career reviews is a concept. So essentially you have a structured conversation around age 50 where someone sits down with you and says, what does your future look like? Who are you? What else is going on in your life? What can you do? What can you achieve? So it's something that's been piloted through the TUC and NIACE, and where a number of our member companies are looking at taking that further. Helping people with disability to remain and carers find a good work-life balance. So there's a lot of work already goes on around disability. We want to look at it specifically through this lens. So it's not that somebody has a disability and that you need to support them with that disability in order to work. We will all of our physical capacity will change over time. So it's about being a bit more light touch and imaginative about that support that already exists for people with some of the most severe disabilities. And harnessing the skills of an intergenerational workforce. So it has to be true, and this is genuinely for debate, I think. I was just at another event that I was speaking at KPMG, which was all about intergenerational workforces, so we've had the debate. I don't think that all of a sudden, if you're born at a generational cusp, so say 1980 is Gen X and Gen Y, and somebody born at the end of 1979 isn't all of a sudden a completely different person to somebody born in 1980. Of course that's ridiculous and not the case and not true. But I think that there are some major shifts in how we operate as a society, which mean that if you were an adult before or after one of those shifts, your outlook on the world might be a bit different, and that's something that maybe we all need to understand better. So what next? So those are my three priorities. So tackling early exit, that's the missing million. That's the first baby to live to 150 has already been born. In that situation where, if anybody here has children, but whoever you do, your children are going to very probably live beyond 100. We can't be living in a world where it's tough to get a job when you're over 50. It just can't be. It can't happen. You've got more than 50 years of, more than half your life in front of you where, somebody's looking at your CV and being like, oh no, I'm not sure they're the right person. It just can't be. It can't happen. It absolutely has to change. So, tackling early exit is a huge priority. Working longer, so it's already happening. People are working longer. Business needs to change to proactively catalyse that and make it happen and make it work, and to think particularly about the groups of people who are at risk of being left behind, and intergenerational workforces, which I've said something about. and if the clicker is going to work on me. So building the movement. So this is, so Business in the Community has 800 members. A number of you might be from organisations in the room. These are the people, this clicker does not love me. Oh, here it is. These are the people from some of those member companies who've made a decision that this is something they want to lead on and drive and make happen. So for all sorts of different reasons, actually. So Andy Briggs is chairing our leadership team. He's the CEO of one of the Aviva businesses, so Aviva UK Line and Life. So it's fairly obvious why this would be something that was important to Aviva. They have life insurance, they have pensions, they have health insurance. There's a whole number of aspects of Aviva's business where an ageing population is really important. Andy himself is really clear that he needs, he personally and Aviva as an organisation need to have integrity in this space. So they need to be confident that they're doing all they can to make the most of people working for them at all different ages, partly as a part of trust in them as a business, and partly because, not dissimilar to Barclays, they if somebody rings up a call centre and wants to talk about their pension or their partner's life insurance, or the priority for them is to have the best possible conversation. So, and it helps to have the best possible conversation if the people working there are themselves diverse, including people who may have some of those life experiences themselves. So young people can also do that job really well, but it's that opportunity to at least be within a team where people have those different life experiences which help you deliver the best possible services. The DWP are fascinating. Is anyone here from the DWP? I don't know whether I should say more or less. I think that public services in general, so obviously the DWP hold a policy responsibility for this, which is why they're interested. I think the public sector has a real responsibility in that they've been reducing numbers over the last period because they've had no choice but to do that to make savings. One of the ways in which that headcount has been brought down has been through early retirement. So it's now almost a management tool. It's kind of, Bob's not doing so well, but he'll probably go in the next round, so, never mind. And I think that does have a real impact. Partly, I think you're losing an excellent cohort of people, which I think people are starting to realise from, the last big round. So there are people who've been there a long time, know what they're doing, know what they're talking about, know how the place works, who are gone. But there's also something about what the knock-on effect that has within the organisation in terms of how people at different ages are seen, which we're talking to them about. Home Instead is a care company, so they are really determined to model a new. It's an American company which has been in the UK for a little while, but a way of delivering home care in a way that is ethical. They're honest about the fact that it costs more than a local authority block contract can pay, which I think is actually quite brave in terms of seeking to grow a business. So they have that role in terms of delivering care to an ageing population, and also they recruit from the communities that they work in, so looking at recruiting people of all ages, including older demographics. Nationwide is absolutely determined to keep hold of more of their really good people, so people get to about 60, and so Alison Robb from Nationwide is determined to keep that going. Boots is a healthcare organisation who plays a vital role in local communities, and part of the role that it plays is in being a place where people, including older people, come together, but also having the right workforce and recruiting in a way that has integrity within the communities that they exist in. Bupa, I think it's obvious why a healthcare organisation is interested in this. The cooperative, it's fantastic to see Helen Webb from the cooperative taking a lead from a retail point of view. So it's one of those sectors where you have a lot of young people, so maybe students, and a lot of older people who are working flexibly, maybe those groups of people who need to work into later life for financial reasons. So really leading the way in firstly supporting those people to remain effective at work, but also to think about how those different generations come together. So it's really exciting to be able to work with a big retailer on this agenda. The Royal Air Force is fascinating because they, for the first time, so the RAF, like a lot of kind of armed forces, or the kind of similarly hierarchical organisations, has a real structured way of promoting people. So you move up rank by rank over a period of time. And they're now saying, okay, we're going to be more flexible about that because we recognise that people have other things going on in their lives. So you could take a bit longer to be promoted, or you could take time out. But that means for almost the first time they're looking at having younger people managing older people. That just hasn't happened before. And they have some real culture clashes within the organisation in terms of, I've been here for a long time, I know how things are done, son. It's like, well, actually, I'm a bit different, and I'm a millennial, and I'm seeing the world through a slightly different lens, and you need to keep hold of me because you've got recruitment problems. So there's a whole host of really fascinating issues in terms of working with the RAF. So they're the brave gang that have made a decision to take a lead on this with us, and there's a whole number of ways in which we're collaborating, bring those organisations together to drive change, and supporting them to be the leaders to inspire others to drive change as well. So it isn't just me turning up here and telling very condensed versions of their stories. So that was us, I think. And the only other thing I would say is that there's a whole number of kind of structured ways in which we at Business and Community support organisations. So we have the Champion Ageing Workforce Award, which seeks to really celebrate some of those achievements. So Centrica won the award for their brilliant work on carers. We have a benchmark, which is where basically companies give us their data and we reflect that back in terms of where we think issues and challenges might be and things to think about. So there's an infrastructure in terms of support, but so much of it is actually about taking that step and saying, this is something that is important to our business and that we want to take seriously, and we want to offer leadership and be a part of the conversation. So I'm looking forward to continuing that conversation in the workshops. Thank you.